So we go under contract, and I know from my standpoint, I send you a barrage of paperwork, and then you send me back that initial search, that commitment for title insurance, and then I know that kind of we fast forward a little bit. We're at the end of the transaction. We're sitting there, and you usually have a big, thick stack of papers.
Yes.
And I've heard the term, you've said to me several times, Mike, we can sign as soon as I get docs. So where do all those papers come from? What are all of those that we're signing?
Yes, yeah. So this is typically for a buyer side then. We're waiting on docs. So after we have issued the title report, made sure that everything is cleared up prior to settlement, the lender will give us the clear to close. We'll balance final figures on a settlement statement, just going over all of the terms of the contract, making sure that they're all met as far as figures go. And once we have those final figures, the lender will release documents to us. Now, these are the closing documents that are signed by the buyer. Sometimes the sellers will need to sign a few disclosures as well as the agents in order for the buyer to borrow the lender's money.
Okay.
Yes, so as the title company, because we facilitate the closings, we'll go over all of those documents with the buyers, make sure that they understand those documents, make sure that everything's signed, dated, initialed properly, and then once we have finished closing, those documents are given back to the lender to review all of the conditions have been met as far as signatures wise, title wise goes, and then once the sellers have signed, that's when we can, as a title company, facilitate the funds by getting the buyer's money and the lender's money to purchase the home from the sellers. We'll disperse all of the costs involved with purchasing the home, such as our title fees, any real estate commissions. If there's any mortgage payoffs, we'll make sure that we have enough funds to pay off all of those loans, as well as any of those encumbrances such as tax liens or judgments.
Okay.
As well.
So once we sign everything, those all go to the lender.
Yes.
And then they verify that, hey, we didn't miss any signatures, everything's okay, and they will send you the funds, and then you will disperse those funds everywhere they're supposed to go. And then what's the last step after the money is sent out? What's the last thing that you guys do?
Right, so we will file and record the paperwork with the county to actually transfer the title to the new owner.
Okay,
No.
and that's an exciting time because based on what we've negotiated in the contract, once it records, from that point is usually where we've negotiated when you'll get keys as the seller, and then as the buyer. That's a pretty exciting moment. That's when you
Yes.
officially become a homeowner.
After all that hard work, yes, yep, you are officially the new homeowner on title of that property.
So one thing that I think confuses a lot of people, and I think even real estate agents and those of us in the industry sometimes mix these two terms up, but it's actually, I think, pretty important, and I want to actually tell a story about this that happened to me, but let me ask you, so when we say we're going to settlement, what is that?
We are going to settle and sign on the terms of the loan and of the purchase contract.
So that's when we're all coming to the title office. We a lot of times that's when our clients finally get to meet you, and
Yes.
you're more than a nice voice on the phone, cheering them on, and we sign all those documents. And so that is the moment we call settlement. So Tiffany, one thing I think that gets a lot of people confused is the difference between settlement and closing. And so you just told us what settlement is. So now what is closing?
So closing is, per the real estate purchase contract, the funding and recording of the home.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important differentiation, because sometimes people think that I signed a 4-inch stack of papers, I'm a homeowner, and that's not true at that exact moment.
Right.
Because you've
There's-
got a lot of work to do at that point,
There's
right?
still a process that happens even after you're done signing, which is why your title company is here. We help facilitate that, move it along the line. But
Yeah.
you're so close, you're almost there.
You're almost there. And so once you've signed all those papers, Tiffany, like she said, she sends those to the lender. The lender's gonna go through them and make sure that we didn't miss any initials or signatures, and that they're gonna give a final approval to fund. They will send the money, you'll disperse those funds and record it, and that's when recording. Now, we a lot of times negotiate when we're gonna have settlement to try to control when closing will happen. So often I'll call you and say, hey, if we want a same day fund and record, when do we need to come settle if we want it to actually close the same day as settlement?
Right. Yeah, so because there is still a process that happens, we want to make sure that we can get them in there as soon as possible. Of course, once we do have those documents from the lender.
Yeah, so if you have those documents, we could maybe meet first thing in the morning and sign, and hopefully by end of day. And I know that I've heard you use terms like, wire cutoff times that play into that, and things like that. But we need to do it early enough so that we can do a same day closing as settlement. But often, in your experience, does that often happen on the same day?
Yes and no, because there are potential things that could come up the day of the settlement in order for us to fund and record. So as you mentioned, we'll make sure that we get all the documents that we just signed off to the lender. The lender will issue us a funding authorization, or basically their final stamp of approval for when they send us the money to go ahead and record. They've signed off on all of the conditions. The borrower can have their money to purchase this home.
Okay.
So there are some delays that can happen, and you mentioned one of them, such as a wire cutoff time. So here in Utah, it's not uncommon for there to be split title companies, a neutral title company handling the buyer side and a neutral title company facilitating the seller side. So if we as a buyer are purchasing a home, we want to make sure that we can send all of the money to purchase to the seller side. And there's a cutoff time for the wire to be sent out, and it depends bank to bank, so just make sure that you verify with your bank what that time is. But if we pass the cutoff time to wire the money to the sellers to purchase their home, it won't be able to record until the following day. So there's always risk of delay.
And I know I've had experiences, not with you, but
Tell me.
but I have had experiences where we have settled on a Friday morning, hoping to record by Friday late afternoon so we could move in over the weekend, and a snag hit somewhere, and now we settled on Friday morning, but it actually doesn't record until Monday, which is quite a lag with the weekend. And I think that's just really important, because you don't own it until it's closed, until it's funded and recorded. So you don't get to move in at that point.
Exactly.
Now with me, when I bought my first home, I didn't understand the difference between settlement and closing. No one explained that to me. And this is my one horror story. I'm glad that it happened to me and none of my clients. But I settled and I moved out. And I moved everything I owned into my grandma's garage. I filled up a U-Haul, I moved into her garage, and we slept on an air mattress in our basement. And so one, I didn't understand that closing and settlement were different events, because it was never explained to me. But then what's worse is that the loan never funded. And so I got to move everything I owned back into the house I had just moved out of. And so even after signing, a problem came up where the lender refused to fund the loan. And I don't know what that reason is, but I just know that it was a bad experience, because I literally moved everything out.
Oh, wow.
I spent 3 days in a basement, and then I moved everything I owned back in. And so obviously that's something I hope to avoid for any client that I
Yes.
represent. But
Absolutely.
I think I maybe would have understood this situation a little bit more had someone explained to me the process that happens after I signed. Because when I signed, I already had a check in my mind. That money was in my bank account, and that wasn't reality. So
Yeah, that sounds, through personal experience, you learned that. So as an agent, you have that ability to recognize that and be empathetic to your buyers and educate them along the process.